Well, everyone, welcome to the first proper podcast for Yorkshire Gamer. You'll have had a listen to the pilot episode, and this is the first one with an interview. And just to make it a little bit more exciting for myself, I've gone for two people to interview rather than one. And it's the first proper podcast. It's the first attempt on Zoom at recording. What could possibly go wrong? So, first thing I'm going to do is introduce my guests. And the first guest, Chris, I was the first guest on his podcast some time ago, back in August, I think it was. Relatively newish to historicals. He's active on social media and he's done some excellent introductory videos on the YouTubes, getting a big follow in as we go along. So say hi to everyone at Yorkshire Gamer, Chris.
Hello, you all right? How's it going?
Brilliant, Chris, brilliant. Great to have you on the show. And just
thanks for having me.
Returning that favour when you put me first on your list of masters. Not saying that I'm old or anything.
Well, masters is like it's not age specific.
Is it not?
Nah, it's not. It's like
it certainly felt that way. But
I suppose that's the thing that people associate with like old masters, don't they? No, it's not. It's not age specific. We'll get someone young on there eventually.
Eventually. And the second guest I've got today is Gareth Lane, and it's a posh podcast, so we've got someone from the aristocracy on. Gareth is better known as Lord Raglan on the social media and the Wargames forums, and he is a prodigious painter and gamer with lots of big collections of gorgeous figures. So if you haven't checked out his social media, get on there and have a look. So welcome, Gareth.
So in true Yorkshire style then, Ken, you buy gum, I'm pleased to be on you. Thank you for the invite.
It's right grand to have you here, lad. Right grand. That's fantastic. Have you done any podcasts before, Gareth?
No, first one, Ken.
First one. Oh well, I'm pleased that you agreed to come on because you've got quite a big presence on the social media and on the Twitters. So it's nice to have you on board.
My wife gave me a warning. She said, "Behave. Whatever you do, just behave."
Well, for those of you who do follow Gareth, you'll already know, but it can get a bit of it can be a bit carry-on wargaming sometimes on the Twitters with the odd risky reference. Should we call it that way?
bit of blue for the dads.
But it's certainly a good laugh on the Twitters and a great guy to follow. So just so while we're on the Twitters, what's your handle on there, Chris?
It's Winston _ab _Reese REES, which is a weird pseudonym I set myself up as on social media when I very first started in wargaming.
Yeah.
Various reasons, don't really know why I did it, but it seems stupid to change it now, so I just kept it there. But my real name is Chris Breese.
And so you've come out with your real name. How are you feeling out of the box, so to speak?
All right, feeling fine. I realised that we've got some builders in, so I might have to move it a bit.
Oh, excellent! I did a recording for the YouTube channel yesterday, and we had some builders fixing the church roof over the road. So I had the builders going, I had next door dog yapping, and professionalism just went out of the window. I just had to keep talking to cover up the background noise. So the first thing I want to do, and as I said on the pilot, it's a little bit of a cliche these days, but get people just to explain how they got into the hobby. And just to switch it up a little bit, I've decided to do this. You've got 4 minutes. So have you been practicing, guys?
I've written some notes. Does that count?
Always odd lib.
Brilliant. So, Chris, I'm going to go with you first, as you were the first person I introduced. So I'm just going to say, Chris, when you're ready, get going, and then I've got a little timer here, and it will tick down to 4 minutes, just over 4 minutes, because I pressed the wrong button when I recorded the sound clip earlier on. So, Chris, when you're ready, mate, 4 minutes, starting from now.
Okay, so wargaming wise, lots of people, well, a few people know me on social media for the account at Winston _ab _Reese, which is where I sort of post pictures of all the bits and pieces I do across Twitter, Instagram, places like that. But my real name is Chris Breese. I'm a 38-year-old dad of 2 kids from Nottinghamshire who I suppose in some ways came into wargaming completely cold about 3.5 years ago. It'll be 4 years this August. And my story, I suppose, is in some ways it starts as a kid, because when I was about 12, a small group of us in the sort of mid to early 90s at high school, secondary school, did Warhammer for about 9 months, a grand total of about 9 months. Where just a group of 4 or 5 of us just bought orcs and Empire and all that sort of stuff and painted small armies and got bored with it in the space of 9 months and sold it all. So there was a kind of, I suppose, a little seed there, albeit a small one. So I was familiar with that world. And then I completely walked away from it, really, at that point as a 13-year-old, I suppose it would have been. Didn't do anything at all, remotely sort of model related at all, until 3.5 years ago, I happened to walk into the shop where Wargames Foundry sort of have a shop in Nottinghamshire, and I happened to walk into that shop through a work job, and it was just hit by this kind of like massive wall of historical miniatures, and that was the first time I kind of really knew that historical wargaming existed. Embarrassingly, living in Nottinghamshire, so I went away, did a Google, bought a couple of sets. Perry Plastics, I think they were, and I was just painting them up on my own to begin with, just not really doing much, not really trying to make any effort to join a club, not thinking about rules, just playing around with the miniatures, Wars of Roses miniatures. And then I finally made the step to sort of go to an event, which I think was the Partisan of that year, so it would have been the Partisan 2 of that year in Nottinghamshire, and I was a little bit not nervous about going, but I didn't know anybody. I had no other friends who were into wargaming at that point, and I didn't know anyone at all else who was into it. And I'm doing bits and pieces on Twitter. I hadn't actually physically sat down with anybody, had a conversation with them, or played a game with them at all. And I walked into Partisan, and I think one of the first things I saw was the Perry twins, Alan and Michael, setting up what I think was an AWI game. I didn't really know what it was at the time, obviously, but now I know it is an AWI game, and I was just blown away by it. That was the first thing I saw when I walked to the show. And then I sort of started walking around, talking to people, saw all the different games going on, and then it was all kind of laid out for me there, like the full range of stuff that you could get, and how far you could take it if you wanted to. And then as part of the same show, I ran into some people who I now know as Like a Stone Wall Wargaming Group, who are from Mansfield, which isn't too far from where I live. It's half an hour drive away. And then I got talking to them. They were very, very welcoming. They let me sit on I think it was a Northern Alliance game. Somebody remind me that what's the sort of 18th century war that's Scandinavian based. Just really show myself up here on
Great Northern War.
Great Northern War, yeah. Whopping Great Northern War game. Huge it was. Absolutely massive. It must have been over 12 foot long. Must have been over 3,000 figures on the table. And despite not knowing anything, they said, "Oh, what are you into?" And I was like, "Well, Wars of Roses." And they said, "Do you play?" And I was like, "No." They're like, "Have you ever played before?" And I was like, "No." And they were like, "Don't matter, sit down. Sit down. Sit down." Right. And they just sort of like, let me play for a couple of hours, chatted to me and said, "Look, message us on Facebook." And I haven't stopped since. I've been sort of playing with those guys, building my collection ever since, and I'm officially addicted. 3.5 years on. Is that me? Right on the bong.
That was fantastic. It's almost like you timed that. That was superb, I have to say.
I think he's been practicing, Ken. That was too much on the money, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, go just slightly off topic, which I'm sure we will do a lot on this podcast. But when I was at university, there was 4 guys who lived in the house, students together, and one of the guys, his party trick was to do the countdown music. So he'd like beatbox the countdown music and then stop exactly on 30 seconds, and he was never ever more than 0.2 of a second out, even after 14 vodkas and 3 pints of ale. Anyway, I digress. thank you very much for that, Chris. That was much appreciated, mate.
You're welcome.
And I'm sure we'll cover some of those bits we've talked about during the course of the rest of the podcast. So, Gareth, have you been practicing, mate?
No, I haven't. So don't expect us anything like Chris. I'm going to bumble my way through this.
Brilliant, mate. I'll give you a wave when you've got about a minute left.
I should confess that I'll probably talk about this later, but as part of my job, it's really important that I understand how long 3 or 4 minutes is.
That's good. That's good.
And that I hit timings. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we game with a guy who's a draftsman, and his ability to accurately guess distance. I'm not saying guess. He knows distances. He's like a laser rangefinder with his eyes.
Yeah.
And when you
That's
get
how long something is.
yeah, it can be annoying. So anyway, are you ready to go, mate?
Yeah, let's rock, mate.
Okay, in your own time, starting now.
Okay, so I guess like Chris, my entry into wargaming was a little bit later on in life. I certainly wasn't interested in any of this stuff when I was in school. I come from a town in West Wales called Carmarthen, and in Carmarthen, to be a geek wasn't a good thing back in those days. In fact, if you walked into a pub and you said that you were a student, that was fighting talk. So anyway, I joined the military. One of the jobs that I did while I was in the military was teaching soldiers small unit tactics, and we used to use kind of coins, or we used to use kind of coloured counters, just to represent troops on the sand table, and just one day I thought, well, what would it be like if I used plastic soldiers instead? So I'd seen airfix soldiers kind of in shops and things like that. So I went off and I bought some, and I painted them red and I painted them blue. And we did that for a little bit, and I thought, well, what if I paint them, to represent, the camouflage? So I went off and I got some, in those days, it was the enamels, the old enamels that we used to paint, airfix planes and boats and things. So I had to go with the enamels, and people said, "Oh, that's not too bad." And I thought, I didn't think anything more of it really. And then just one day I was walking down the street, and we had my wife and my daughter with me, and we came across the Games Workshop. And I went in there and thought, wow, look at all this stuff. And they also had acrylic paints. I thought, woof, give this a go as well. And this is before the day before we had washes, it was acrylic paints, so I took those away, started painting with those, got some really nice results, kind of got into it. And then again, dropped it again when I went off and did another piece of work, and then came back into the hobby, and I got into 30K in a really, really big way, and started painting with brushes and with airbrushes and things, and then sort of got into historicals, and found a really nice bunch of friends that we did really big historical games with, and I found that I was able to kind of churn through miniatures in a fairly rapid rate, and as a result, we could get bigger armies to the table. So that was it. And going back, I guess 2 years ago, I discovered Twitter, and Twitter just kind of opened up my horizons with regards to the number of gamers who are out there. I mean, until I went on there, I didn't realize how many gamers I had living close to me, which was fabulous. And now, I've got several people, once we're out of this blooming lockdown, that I could probably play 3 or 4 games a week with if I wanted to. So yeah, I'm not sure I need to wait till the countdown tune to come in. I guess that's my background as a wargamer, really.
That's brilliant, Gareth. Thank you. You're on about 3 minutes 30. So you'll be giving lessons to Henry Hyde there about cutting things down.
Yes, Henry, if you tune it in, give me a ring.
Yeah, we could start our own consultancy on quick wargaming backgrounds. Just a couple of things to talk about out of those. Chris, you've got your YouTube channel, and you've done quite a lot of introductory videos on there, which I think are really good for new people coming into the hobby.
Yeah.
What sort of a reaction have you had to those?
Really quite good, some of them, I suppose. I mean, it's not the channel's not. I don't expect it's going to enter the stratosphere or anything, but it's what I wanted to do when I created it was to sort of create some of the videos that I wish I'd have found when I started, because now I've got sort of 3 or 4 years under my belt. I think I've realised that I'm probably one of these wargaming evangelists, as they're known, kind of thing. You know, very, wanting to help people who were like me 3 years ago. You know, who just don't have a clue, but they want to learn, and they want to have somebody to talk to and answer questions about. And so there's actually a playlist that I've sort of started to set up and develop, which is all about like the very, very, very basics, like what are Wargames rules, what are Wargames paints. I think that we'll probably go into this later, but the telling thing is that the most viewed video I've ever done, which is at about 3,500 or something, it's just a video that answers the question like basically Wargames rules for complete beginners, which is where I just talk and demonstrate for about 45 minutes. And I just assume that the viewer is curious, but essentially knows nothing about how like the most basic Wargames mechanics rules work, and go from there. Which tells you a lot, really. I suppose it tells me there's a lot of people out there that just want someone to say, this is the basics of how it works. This is what it actually is. Yeah. Well,
I'm glad that's the case. I've certainly enjoyed, even with all my years of gaming, going through those videos, and I think they're a great thing for the hobby in general. So a little tick box there, Chris. Top job, mate.
Yes, I mean, keep going with it, I suppose. See where, you know, just there's a few more ideas I've got and stuff. But
brilliant. So
get into it.
Over to you, Gareth. Then I think the question that most people will want to ask from you is, how do you manage to pump out so many figures in such quality?
It's terrifying, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think I can,
and inspiring in equal measure.
I think I can paint quickly, and I think I pump out quite a lot of stuff. But Gareth, you leave me standing, mate.
For me, it's discipline, really. And a wife that enjoys watching soaps. So I'm absolutely guaranteed, 2.5 hours an evening, and a couple of hours on the weekend where she's not going to bug me, and she's going to leave me, do my hobby. And I'm really methodical with it, really. I've spoken on Twitter around batch painting, and I think that's a skill that people can learn. At times I can paint between sort of 50 to 100 figures at a time and just kind of churn through them. It's really monotonous and it's boring. One evening you might do all the trousers, next evening you might do all, the faces, but you've just got to kind of zone out and just get on with it. And if you want to get big armies to the table, I think at speed, that's the way to go. I know people, sometimes struggle with painting more than 10, but I think it's just being that really disciplined and just plowing through them.
Do you think that's maybe come from your military background, a bit of discipline there?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I've played sport all my life, and it's painting miniatures. It is just in complete contrast to anything else really I've done, as a hobby. My work is really busy, and I just find it extremely relaxing just to be able to kind of focus, on the paintbrush and plowing through a set of figures in an evening.
Yeah, I think it's something I plan to cover in a later podcast. But I think the people who have high pressure jobs or jobs that are very busy, myself included, my little personal zone is my paint table, and I can just switch off everything that's happened at work in that day and just drift off and paint. So I know exactly where you're coming from there. So what's the big project that you've got on at the moment then, Gareth? What's filling up your paint table as we speak?
So it's going to be the Italian Wars, thanks to you, and to Stephen as well, old Wargamer there from Australia.
Yeah.
You know, it's a period that's really interesting me. We've also got the War of the Roses going on at the moment, but which I know we'll talk about later. But I've got a couple of other projects that I just need to finish off: Japanese for the Pacific, and the Germans for World War One. But once these are out of the way, it is literally Italian wars now for the rest of the year, I guess.
Brilliant. And you didn't mention in your little 4 minutes, just roughly what sort of age are you, Gareth?
I am 55 this year.
So mid-50s, so similar age to myself then. So Chris is the little baby here today.
Yeah, and that's where I guess I said that I was kind of late. That the geek gene was latent with me certainly, but I've still managed to get 25 years in.
Brilliant.
It kicked in around 30, I guess, for me.
Yeah.
So Chris, then what are you working on at the moment? What's your big project?
Well, I'm doing one side, really, I suppose, or the bulk of one side anyway, for our Wars of Roses project that we've got coming up in May.
Brilliant.
So that's, I mean, Wars of Roses is probably what I'm doing, to be honest, 9 nights uptown painting.
Brilliant.
So I mean, I'm in the last, because this is probably a good thing that I did this, but when I started 3 years ago, I decided I was going to pick one main thing. And I'd have other distractions, have other little side projects, but I decided I'd pick one thing. What I wanted was a big Wars of Roses collection that you could divide into 2 armies, totaling about 1,000 figures, 500 a side. And by May, I will probably complete that. I'll be done and dusted, sort of thing. So it's I suppose it's the end of a 3.5 year project. I'm in the last 6 months of a 3.5 year project where I've gone down all the little alleyways doing bits and pieces of a little bit of World War II, and I've got a Saxon army that's kind of like a side distraction. I've done some bits of terrain and stuff, but the thing that's dominated the last 3.5 years really for me has been Wars of Roses. So
no worries. Well, thanks very much, guys. We're just going to move on to the next section. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back in the Yorkshire Gamer podcast, episode 1. And as you will know, this is all about big games. This is big games on big tables with lots of figures. And rather than spend hours and hours talking about people's past, what I want to talk about with people who come on this show is big games and what a big game is to them and how it affects them. And Chris, you kind of touched on it in your 4 minutes because you had a similar experience to me. I walked into Northern Militaire in 1984 and saw this massive game and went, wow. So you mentioned that was yourself with the Perry's game. What was your sort of reaction to what you saw?
I mean, I suppose the thing to say is that I'd obviously seen lots of photographs and things and seen pictures before I'd bothered to go to a show, and when I use the phrase plucked up the courage to go to a show and get stuck in. But I don't think anything can sort of substitute for actually seeing it there and being able to walk around it and sort of look at it close up. And I think Partisan's got good games generally, like the standard demo and participation game is pretty good there. It's known for being good standard games. So it just had that really wide impact on me. Like when you walk up to the table and look, and like everything looks really good. Everything's a really good standard. You could quite happily just sat in a museum. Yet it was a game. You know, it was something that somebody had created and you could play with and play a game with, and something to sociable and interact with. I just thought it was amazing, really. I think it reminds me of when you go to the Royal Armouries in Leeds. If anybody's ever been there, which is a fantastic museum in Leeds of arms and armour, basically. And in there, there's an exhibition, a whopping great diorama of the Battle of Agincourt, which is part done by the Perrys. It's all their figures, and that's got 4,000 models in it, I think, something like that. 4,000 models in it, and it's got that sort of wow factor. It's a similar sort of thing. I don't think when you go to a place like that, and those kinds of games and that kind of level, even if you're not particularly interested in the hobby or the period in the first place, you can't help but at least go, look at that, and walk over to it. It's got that sort of, I think of it as like a crossover wow factor to it. You don't have to be interested in models per se or interested in history per se to appreciate it. I suppose that was the key.
I suppose just a shout out, Ken, to David Marshall, who made that diorama for the Paris. I mean, he's just a brilliant terrain maker, isn't he? I'm very privileged to have some of his pieces, and I visited him at home several times. He's just a really nice guy as well. But what an awesome terrain maker!
Yeah. And that's often the difference, isn't it, with a big game? In that lots of figures on a green cloth with cardboard hills, and it isn't spectacular, is it? But when you've got guys like that, it makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
I think it's a good point, Gareth makes, actually, because it's the figures. The figures are a massive part of that diorama, but the terrain sort of makes it as well, because it's such a miniature world. It's like the detail and stuff like that. The horse's hooves in the mud and everything. The mud itself. The trees are turning brown because it's autumn. It's amazing.
Yeah, I have to say that I think terrain is what kind of rocks it for me, really. I really like a good looking table. I invest in lots of scenery. I never make any of my own scenery, by the way. I'm too busy painting figures. But I'm really lucky to have a couple of guys that I know, including Dave, that will make terrain for me. And for me, part of the big game experience, I guess, is coming in and just looking at the table and going, "Wow, doesn't that look awesome?"
Yeah.
So in your background, in your 4 minutes, Gareth, you kind of had a little bit of a different route into the hobby to many people. What was your first sort of interaction or your first sight of a big game?
Gosh, I think this was Go and Salute. I going back a few years. Do you know Snapdragon Studios? They used to sell resin scenery. A chap called Kerry. In fact, it was where I met Adrian Deacon actually for the first time. I used to sell figures and work alongside Kerry. So Kerry would have 12 foot worth of stand at shows, and maybe I'd have 6 foot tacked down at the end. And he would sell resin scenery and I would sell painted figures. And I guess it was just going along with Kerry and seeing these fabulous demonstration games that were taking part all across the country. Those are the ones that really got me fixed into this hobby.
And is it possible to, and this is an open question to both of you, I tried to define what a big game was during the pilot episode, and I did find it a little bit difficult. What to you are the essential ingredients of a big game? Gareth, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I don't think it's about the number of players. I think you can have a big game with just one player aside. I guess for me, it's having several brigades on the table. So you've got a number of small battles inside the large battle. So you may be winning on the right flank, but you're losing on the left flank. It can go swings and roundabouts, really. I think that's what kind of sets a big game for me, is that you have several defined units fighting independendly.
Yeah, Chris, are you in agreement with that?
I broadly agree with that. I think possibly because of the era which I've come into it, Ken. Like what I think of as a big game is probably a bit different to what you think of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think of a big game. Not a very big game, but I think a big game is like 400 models a side, maybe 300 models a side.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be on a 12 by 6.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big game, and like a 12 by 6 with 2,000 models or 1,000 models is probably a very big game, and something that's 24 foot by 8 is a massive game to me. Do you know what I mean? But big game in inverted commas to me starts at about 300 figures aside, actually 300-400 figures aside.
Would you say that was down to what you've been exposed to during your time in the hobby? Because probably. I think that big games, the big games that I remember going into the Northern Militaire, those games are very, very rare now. So you would go to a show and you would see 10, 12 massive games, and then there was the room with the competition players in that I talked about, which is probably going to get me into trouble on social media somewhere, because they'll gang up with the pitchforks and come after me. Do you think that might have some effect on what your experience of a big game is?
Probably, yeah. I think I found it fascinating to discover, actually, that to discover wargaming relatively cold, and to have lived in Nottinghamshire for sort of 15 years without realising the scale of the hobby, the breadth of the hobby. Yeah, it was a surprise to me, I suppose, and I'll go into that later. But that was a surprise to me. And then also, you know, I recognised what you were talking about in the pilot about Northern Militaire and the size of the games, just how they used to be in the 90s. I think it's kind of like last time you saw. There's people who I knock about with at like Stone Wall in Mansfield. They talk about that era. Yeah, and they would put on games of that size. They show me photographs from kind of mid 90s, where they have got like knocking on the door of 24-foot long tables, with whopping great sort of legions of figures, and sort of like 8 players aside, and probably thousands upon thousands of figures on a table. And I find it interesting that that's largely extinct. Not extinct, but it's not. It's very uncommon now. Yeah, at a show, isn't it?
Yeah. A show, definitely. It's still out there, and some upcoming guests on the podcast with holiday centres, Wargames holiday centres, still have those things. I just feel that, and the main reason why I decided to do this podcast was just to try and bring back the love for the bigger game, and just let people know that sort of stuff is out there. So would you, I kind of said it had to be bigger than a 6x4. Is that something that you would say, Chris, is right or wrong?
To me, it's more, I know you can only fit so many figures on a 6x4, but for me, it's kind of like, it is like number of figures. Yeah. Is because I think once you get, because my concern, right, is that once you get past 6x4, you're getting past the kind of space where somebody could physically game at home. Yeah. For many people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, once you get, I mean, some people can't do a 6x4. Yeah. But there are lots of people like that. But then there are more people that can do a 6x4, and then once you get past 6x4, you get into the point where a very, very large number of people can't fit that in. So you kind of you don't stop those people from doing big games, but you make it much more difficult. You know, it's the number of figures, I suppose. You can get quite a lot of 6x4. Yeah.
And back to you, Gareth. Do you think that that figure scale makes a difference for a big game?
No, I don't think so. I think you can play big games in whatever scale takes your fancy, really. I made the decision many years ago to stick with 28mm for everything, because I like scenery so much. I would dread to think having to collect scenery in various scales. So when you've got one scale, you can often use pieces across several periods, can't you? Which I think is really helpful. Going back to the size of the table, I did hear what you said in the opening episode. And when you were talking about 8-foot wide tables, I was cringing, because I actually reduced the size of my table from 6 foot wide to 5 foot wide, because I was having back pain.
So, I have to say, my list of things to talk about, medical issues due to big games, was not one of them. I have not got that on my list, so well done for bringing that in.
Can I just say that I'm only 5'5", right? So you make a 6 foot wide table for me. You're going to be moving my figures for me, I'm afraid. Right?
We don't worry, Chris. We've got a little hoist that we can sort of.
Yes, yeah. Yellow pages. Yeah. Get him a stool.
But I do think the larger the table you've got, it does encourage you to play those big games. I mean, in Shell HQ, we can go as big as 14 foot long by 5 foot, and of course, once you've got a table, you think, well, I need to fill it with some figures then, you know. So it does kind of drive you on to get figures done. Yeah,
we the 8 foot table that I spoke about in the pilot episode was our Battle of Jutland, and that was 24 foot by 8. And we did manage to get close to the table in the middle, but because the fleets are separated by a reasonable distance, the stuff that you were moving was within reasonable reach. And I think going back to what you said initially, Gareth, about the multiple player thing, I was playing the German battle cruisers, which, if anyone's got any knowledge of the battle, they're right at the front of the German line. I had absolutely no idea what was going on at the other end of the table, which is very much like a divisional commander or a brigade commander in a large battle would be. They would be concentrating on their area and not seeing what's going on all the way down the other end of the table. They just wouldn't have a clue, and I quite enjoyed that feeling very much. So what, Chris, have you been involved in any big games? What's the biggest game you've kind of played in?
I mean, I can't claim responsibility for really organising it, but I suppose as part of the people who turned up and played it and videoed it for the club. But the last big thing I suppose that Like a Stone Wall did was a fantastic Palelu game, World War II game.
Yeah.
At Partisan 2019. I want to say 2019, not last year, the year before, which they won best participation game for Partisan. I'll say they, because I think I play tested it a few times. Yeah. I don't think I even made a bit of terrain for it. I just turned up and play tested with them, and just, and then did a video for them on the day. I can't claim responsibility for making much of it.
Yeah,
but that was driven by 2 or 3 other members, but that was the biggest game, and that was ambitious, not in terms of figure numbers. There's plenty of figures, but there weren't 1,000. But it was a 12 by 6, and it had a sand table towards the airfield at the back, and then it had a strip of jungle, and then it had the coastal line, and it had the gun emplacement to the left hand side. So it was, in terms of terrain, it was hugely ambitious, and it looked fantastic. It's a site, that scale of terrain, it was amazing. Yeah.
And how long was that game over? What sort of a time period did you play? Was it a day or 2 days, or?
It's just on for the duration of the show, and I think we did 2 playthroughs of it, I think, in the end.
So you've not had the full in weekend, Friday through till Saturday afternoon.
Not yet.
With beer. Right, we're going to sort that out for you.
Not yet. No.
We are going to sort that out for you, mate, and we are going to have a proper big game weekend, mate, and we'll make.
I've never actually done that. Frustratingly, right? One of our group members, Togs, was doing a whopping great 19th century South American game, which he'd actually got to the point where he'd rented a church hall out in Derbyshire for.
Yeah, we're getting there now.
I think it was L-shaped as well, and I was down as one of the players. Again, I wasn't going to paint anything, or it was Togs driving it, but we said, I'm going to need people to turn up and play, and help people who want to join in if they want to turn up, and I was down to do that. I think I was going to do the Saturday with him, and I was going to do a video and everything, because I'm like the group video guy. So I was down to do that, and obviously the pandemic killed it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that was a shame. Gareth, have you had that weekend experience?
Not a full weekend, no. We've played full days. Never played a demonstration game at a show or a club.
Yeah.
In fact, locally we don't have a club that focuses in on historicals. There is a club, I say probably about 12 miles away, but they are nearly all predominantly Games Workshop gamers.
Yeah.
So I went once and never went back. For me, my experiences of really big games are playing in people's houses or people coming to my house to play. Having the luxury of having quite a large shed in the garden, it's easy to kind of set up games and things and play over a couple of weeks. Or when I've gone to other people's, I've probably got 4 guys really that are into big battle games that will set things up and get people around to play. So that's my experience really is playing in people's houses, but not the extent that you've played, Ken. I have to say a weekend of gaming, that sounds a killer on the back and knees.
Yeah, the Wargames Holiday Centre that used to be near Scarborough, that was originally run by Peter Gilder, and then Jerry Elliott had it, and it's now, I'm not 100% sure where they are located now, but they're going to come on a podcast later on in the series, and we're going to talk about the weekend games. But people would drive up on a Friday night. They would come into the Wargames room, they would have a briefing, look at the table, sort out their orders, and then they go down the pub. And then about 10 o'clock in the morning, if you'd get into the games room and you'd start the game and you'd game through to sort of 5, 6 o'clock at night, and then go down the pub, and then get up the next day, and then come back on the Sunday and game through till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And hopefully you were sober enough to drive home at that particular point. So that was very popular in the day, and I'll be interested to speak to the Holiday Centre guys and another one of my friends who runs Wargames Holidays, and see how popular that is. So we've talked about the big games that you've been involved in and where you are with stuff. Is there any drawbacks that you think, or any negative side to a big game? I think, Chris, probably you might be better speak on this first, as you're younger, if that's right.
yeah. I think. So you spoke a bit about, in your pilot about skirmish games and your sort of your much greater preference, shall we say, for the big game over the small game. I think that the difficulty is, right, the sort of the dilemma for a younger sort of novice, right, is that, you are bowled away by those huge games, and I'll say, those really big games. And in this sense, let's say, you walk into a show like I did, and you see a 12x6 that's got a couple of thousand figures on it. That is inspiring, but it's easy to also be intimidated by it and think, oh, I could never do that. So I think, and in my opinion, right, and a lot of people disagree with me, in my opinion, there are loads of sort of hurdles and barriers and sort of stopping points to get into historical wargaming. There's probably too many. I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. Nobody's fault at all, but it's probably harder than it should be to get into on a basic level. So if you if you were to walk in, like I said before, I think on Twitter with you, Ken, like if you walk into a show and as a novice who's curious, who wants to get started, and you only saw 12x6 footers with 3,000 figures with relatively complicated rule systems, you will enjoy that show, but I think that makes you less likely to start in today's day and age, because some of the games that you've got lesser preference for, they are that starting point, they're that stepping stone, they're that kind of training ground in some ways. Or maybe they're just an option for somebody, do you know what I mean, to get started. Because although I always wanted to build a massive army and to play on a minimum 6 foot, preferably 12, and get like big games going and get into that, that was always what I wanted to do. In my first year, I set myself a simple goal. I bought a copy of Lion Rampant, which is a skirmish game, which you can play with 60, 80 figures aside. And so I could play a war game relatively quickly in my first year, so I could get a grasp of a basic system. I could set it up on my dining room table, get a few bits of terrain, paint up 80 figures aside, and I'm into it. I've started, so I've got a game going. It's not a big game, but I've sort of cracked the basics, and I've played Line Rampant a few times since, and it's all been used as a kind of build up and a sort of like learning system for me. To get to sort of graduate upwards. That's how I've always seen that. It's like a curve, an upward curve. And the skirmish games, even now for me, like I've been playing Nevermind the Billhooks recently, which is a Wars of Roses big skirmish small battle system is how it's described. That's quite nice for me now to just like get, my son's only young and he quite likes playing, and he can kind of broadly understand Billhooks. And it's relatively quick to set up and it's easy for him to understand. So it's like a nice middle ground as you're growing your confidence and your collection up to those whoppers, which is kind of like where I'm getting to now, kind of thing.
And
so
Gareth, did you see it that way, or how do you see the drawbacks of the big game? Do you see skirmish gaming as a way in, or how do you see it?
I think it's an entry point for people. I think it's an easy way for people to get to join the hobby and give it a go. And I think that they're very much based on cost. If you put a big game on, it's going to cost you a few bob in figures. Okay, now that we've got a fairly wide selection of plastics, I guess that's been offset a little bit, but it's still pricey, isn't it? You buy a box of Perry's, they're War the Roses, let's say, archers. I mean, that gives you what, a unit and a bit, really. So you still need several of those to play a big game. So yeah, space obviously is a concern for people, as Chris has already touched on. For a lot of guys, being able to achieve a 6 foot by 4 is a challenge. To play your big games, do you need to rent a hall? Do you need to go to a club, etc.? I mean, that's a difficulty. Scenery we've talked about already. If you're going to make that big table look pretty, you need lots of nice scenery to do that. Again, that's further cost, more work. But it's, I think, definitely the biggest challenge, I think, for people is the amount of painting that people have got to put in, the amount of hours you've got to dedicate to the hobby to get those figures painted to a Wargames standard to get them on the table.
And just going on from that, then the attitude, or the way the podcasts have come across that I've listened to have been very much that people don't want to do that anymore. That they don't want to take that step from that initial skirmish game into the larger games. As I mentioned, if I've got a game that's got 60 figures, I'm going to paint that in 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'm going to get bored with it because I'm not doing anything more with it. Do you think that encouragement is out there still for people to go big, Gareth?
Probably less so at the moment in lockdown. I think the experience of going to shows and seeing these big games being put on by clubs was definitely a good motivating factor, I think, for some people. We're pretty limited now, aren't we, with regards to our wargaming experience. I've certainly played some virtual games, during lockdown, and that's been fun. But they've always been small skirmish games. I can't imagine doing a virtual game for 7 or 8 hours. With one person moving the figures while the rest of us are kind of, dictate being the generals over the mic. I think, that's a challenge, definitely. And
Chris, what about you on that point? Do you think that it's not, the bigger game is not being pushed at the moment as much as it was? There certainly, to me, doesn't seem to be much stuff coming out for bigger games. It's all skirmish Kickstarters and like Baron's War and all these sorts of games, and Lion Rampant. They're all 50, 60 figures.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this today. I was thinking, like, who was the last person or company to really push big games? I think the ones that spring out to my mind anyway, with things like Black Powder and Hail Caesar, which are going back 10 years now, I think.
It is, yeah.
And that was a real. When you look back at that, I mean, it happened before I was into the hobby, but looking at it now, sort of in the rearview mirror a little bit, that was Hail Caesar is a system for big games. So they were the last people to really, let's design a system for really big games, and there's a series of miniatures based at really big games, and let's push it commercially.
Yeah,
I think that's a lot of this comes down to basic economics. I think for people who design rules or sell figures or are into games, it makes commercial sense to create smaller games that are easier to get into and then easy to play and get through, and then introduce other rules for different periods, and so you can sell more things that way. There's a bit of economics going on there.
That you brought up a very important point, Chris, there, and one that I wanted to talk about. And to me, in my tiny little mind, I look at the amount of advertising, the amount of hype that comes into some of these games, and you'll see it's everywhere, and it's like, play this. Infamy. I love the Lardies, but their rule sets are a little bit too small for me. But I love what they do, and I love their mechanisms, and I think they're a fresh breeze of air for the hobby. But they spend a lot of time getting people into a game that is 60 figures. So why not get those people in? And you've spent your money on your advertising. Why not get them in and then get them to go big?
Well, is that not kind of what a lot of people will do naturally, though? Particularly with things like sharp practice, because that's a taster of Napoleonics. I think I love sharp practice because it's a way that I can envisage myself getting into Napoleonics. That's a way off for me at the moment, because it's still that whole era still terrifies me.
Yeah.
But to me, when the day comes when my kids have probably left home, right, in 10 years, right, one day I'm going to do Napoleonics, and I'll probably start off by doing something like sharp practice, just like that. So I can paint up, I can get into the era, I can do my research, I can get my head around it. I can get a game out early by using something like sharp practice, and then eventually I might move on to another set of rules. But I've got the figures. Period. I've got an understanding. I've done my homework. I've got into sharp practice, and then eventually I'll move up somewhere else, to different rules. That's how I view stuff like that.
So you're kind of saying it's like a gateway drug, is what you're saying?
Kind of, yeah. Drug analogies, I think, are fair, in some ways. I mean, at least in some ways, sort of psychologically, I suppose. It's an easy entry point, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
Not that I'm advocating like methods of experimenting with substances, but it is a simple way in, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's probably a fair comment to make as well. If Rich and Nick sold miniatures, you might see the size of their games increase.
Yes, I think you're very, very right there. That's a big one. What's the new and shiny thing like for you, Gareth? Are you do you stay on one project for a while, or do you move around and pick things up here and there?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on World War I, and undecided at the moment whether to use Through the Mud and the Blood or use Trench Wars, which is a very old set of rules from Old Glory. I guess with Trench Wars, what it'll give me, it'll allow me to use between 300-400 figures per side, and I think that will look spectacular. I think if I went through with Through the Mud of the Blood, I think it's about 120 figures you can get away with, but I think it plays better probably at a smaller level from talking to people who've played this game before. I'm also pushing World War 2, so in the Pacific. So I've done 2 fairly large armies for the US and also the Japanese. But they are just side projects. These ones, you know, even though they're large skirmish, it's the big battles that really interest me. Really looking forward to the War of the Roses. You know, that's going to be a great event. Hopefully it'll come off in May, but if it doesn't, then I'm sure we'll do it later in the year. And then kind of that leads me into the Italian wars. At the moment, you put me on to Furioso. Really like the look of those rules. And I think it will play with the size of the size of units that that I'm interested in. But I haven't given it a go yet, so only time will tell.
Is skirmishing skirmish games something that you avoid then, Gareth, or do you have like little side projects here and there that fit into that category?
Yeah, absolutely. You may have seen my Chechen War games that I play. I mean, I play them with bolt action, but I upscale bolt action. So where usually you're using a platoon and maybe a couple of vehicles per side, I might use company attacks with that and have, you know, several armored units on the table. So I think you can take these smaller sets and you can adapt them really to what fits your most enjoyable kind of style of play.
Lovely. Well, I think we've had a good chat there about the big game, and I'm just going to take a short break now, and we'll be back shortly. Okay, welcome back to Yorkshire Gamer, and before we get on to the big topic of the World War of the Roses, we're just going to have a little test or a little quiz for our guests today, and it's 20 quick-fire questions, and we'll go through it with both our guests today, and it's based around what I think, and obviously with me being from Yorkshire, what I think is correct. So it's how Yorkshire Gamer are you? So are there any volunteers to go first, or should we just go with Chris?
You can pick on me if you want.
Yeah, pick on you. Okay, Chris.
Why not?
There's no time limit on this, but I want the first thing that comes into your head. And if you pass, if you're going to be not making a decision, I'm going to mark you down. Is that fair?
I feel like I'm going to fail this spectacularly, but I'll give it a
go. As we say to all the kids today, there's no pass or fail.
Okay.
Right, so 20 questions, quick fire. Question 1, go big or go home?
Go big.
Go big. Contrast paints, great or a waste of time?
Great.
Winsor & Newton or Yorkshire made Pro Art?
Winsor & Newton.
96 figures, an army or a pipe block?
Pipe block.
Good lad. 6x4 table, big game or small?
Big game. Big game.
Points based or historical order of battle?
Historical order.
Wet palette or old bit of MDF?
Wet palette.
Undercoat figures, black or white?
Neither, but black. Black.
Would you ever, in inverted commas, run a list?
Never.
Good lad. Pipe blocks, tightly packed or socially distanced?
Tightly packed.
2-hour club game or weekend monster?
2-hour club game.
2-hour club game. Competition game or campaign game?
Campaign game.
Round dice, allowed or banned?
Banned.
Banned, good lad. Would you pay 33 pence for a communist?
Yes.
I'll come back to that one.
Seems value.
Do you love a good table in a set of rules?
Do I love a good table and a set of rules?
No, in a set of rules.
Do I love a good table? Oh, a table is that? Yeah, I like a table. I like a table.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah.
28 mil is king. Yes or no?
Yes. Sorry, everybody. Sorry. Yes, it is.
Unpainted miniatures allowed on the table. Yes or no?
No. Don't matter how badly painted they are, but
as long as somebody's made the effort.
Yeah.
Good lad. This one is definite pass or fail. Bradford City or Leeds United?
Leeds.
Oh! Fail!
I know a lot of Leeds fans more than I know Bradford fans, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's bad. Yorkshire or that other place over the hill?
Yorkshire.
Good lad.
Yorkshire.
And finally, Games Workshop are the work of the devil. Yes or no?
No.
Lovely. We'll come back with your results in a minute, Chris. But there's some discrepancies there, mostly around the Bradford City question. Well, let's see how Gareth does with the same.
That was my biggest aberration, wasn't
it? Gareth, are you ready?
You fire away.
Go big or go home?
Go big.
Contrast paints, great or a gimmick?
Gimmick.
Windsor and Newton or Yorkshire made Pro Art?
Windsor and Newton.
96 figures, an army or a pike block?
Pike block.
6x4, big table, big game or small?
Small game.
Points-based armies or historical orders of battle?
Always historical OBs.
Wet palette or an old bit of MDF?
Old bit of MDF.
Good lad. Undercoat figures, black or white?
Black.
Would you ever run a list?
No, never.
Pike blocks, tightly packed or socially distant?
As tight as a duck's bottom.
Excellent. That's what we like to see. 2-hour club game or a weekend monster?
In between.
In between. Ooh, indecisive. Competition game or campaign game?
Oh, campaign game.
Round dice, allowed or banned?
Banned.
Excellent. We don't want those. Would you pay 33 pence for a communist?
No.
No. Good one. Love a good table in a set of rules.
Love a good table, yes.
Excellent. 28 mil is king.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do they do figures in other scales?
I'm not sure. I think we might cause an eruption with that statement, Gareth, but well done. Unpainted miniatures allowed on the table, yes or no?
Never.
The important question, Bradford City or Leeds United?
As neither of them are in Wales, I'm going to say...
The Bradford City
which is closest to Wales? Just draw a line.
Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
Lancastrians.
Oh dear. And the final question, GW, are they the work of the devil?
No, I don't think they are.
Excellent. Right, well, I'll come back shortly with the results of that, and we'll see how you've got on. Well, so our bank of highly powerful fourth generation computers have come up with the percentages, and Chris, unsurprising after the Leeds United result and the wet palette, which we're not going to agree on ever.
No, never.
You are 60% Yorkshire Gamer, which I think is not too bad. Not too bad.
It could be worse, couldn't it? I thought I'd absolutely embarrass myself.
You thought you bombed it there, did you think?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
No worries. And today's winner, 75% Yorkshire Gamer, Gareth. So well done, Gareth.
It's always nice having a bit of Yorkshire in you.
Exactly. We'll draw a line under that straight away. So,
You know what I mean? This is what you meant.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of controversy there. I think at least one of Gareth's comments about 28mm will get us into trouble. My wet palette comment will get us into trouble, and we'll have people all over the internet having a go at us already. But I can take it. Chris, do you remember Palm Tree Man that we spoke about in our interview?
I do remember Palm Tree Man. I remember him well.
Yeah.
Has he been back in touch?
He hasn't been back in touch. Gareth, are you aware of this story?
I did, yeah. You're in the podcast that you did, yeah.
So, yeah, he hasn't been back in touch, but the potential for us to generate a Palm Tree Man as a result of this conversation.
It's just trebled.
Yeah, I think we've increased fairly large there. So the main topic, or the topic that we were going to talk about today, is your World War of the Roses. And people hopefully will have seen something about it on certainly on the Twitter. I've seen it, and Facebook as well. Is it on there?
It's around, but
it's around.
We all don't spend that much time on Facebook compared to a lot of other people. So it's there. Yeah, but there's no Facebook page for it. So it's on Lead Adventure Forum, it's on Instagram, it's on Twitter. Basically, there's three. So
am I right in saying that both you, Gareth, and you, Chris, were kind of involved in the start of this?
Yes, I'm trying to think back.
It was
right in the middle of the second wave, wasn't it? But we managed to start talking across Twitter, and there was.
I think it was Stephen, Gareth, that actually introduced us.
I think it was Steve. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's how we originally started a conversation. Yeah. That's how it started, I think.
And what was the sort of germ of that conversation? How did it all sort of get going?
Well, I think this comes from and again, if you're not on Twitter as a wargamer, you might not even know he exists. But there's a guy called Stephen Wold, whose Twitter profile is @oldwargamer, who's got something like 5,000 followers or something, which on Twitter is a huge amount for a wargamer.
Did he do an interview with you, Chris? I think I recognise.
He did, yeah. He did. He did a Masters interview on the YouTubes, and he's really sort of supportive of trying to start simple sort of internet-based challenges and like little inspirational things to get people together and to cheer each other up in lockdown kind of thing. And I think it was him originally that put me and Gareth in touch with each other, because I think Stephen was a bit like, you never had a conversation with Gareth, with Lord Raglan, about Wars of Roses. And I was like, no, you should. So it's that kind of conversation, you know. Yeah. I think that's how Gareth originally met, because we never actually physically met in person. It's all been done in lockdown. So that was how it came about. And then somebody set up a Twitter group, like a Twitter messaging chat group, just sort of myself, Gareth, Stephen, and a chap called Paul Baldwin, who's another sort of big 15th century fan who's on Lead Adventure Forum a fair bit. Yeah. And that's the kind of foursome that are sort of behind it, if you like, that have created it.
So Gareth, what do you remember about those first conversations?
Well, I mean, this is kind of an unreserved plug, really, for Athenian Miniatures. A friend of mine, John Kabushi, has got a small miniature company, and he commissioned a War of the Roses range, obviously in 28mm, because that's the only
scale that we can
scale they do. Yeah. Over the last 18 months or so. And he was just about to launch a Kickstarter in November time last year. So I thought to help him, what we would do is see if we could generate some interest in the War of the Roses, and he's very kindly donated an army for the diorama competition that we're looking to run alongside the big battle event. It was great actually. We got together with these group of guys that all had similar interests, I mean, from the word go, I mean, that first meeting that we had, what we were chatting away for hour and a half, and we'd never met each other before. We just had the common interest of being a wargamer and having an interest in medieval battles.
And what was the plan? What was the evil plan that you put together in the dark lair?
We should say what it is, shouldn't we? Yeah, what it actually is. So, I mean, the basic objective, first of all, was right. Let's connect a small group of us that are into this period, and maybe is it practical to combine our collections once lockdown ends and get a big game on.
Yeah.
So the starting point was myself, Gareth, and Paul are going to play a Battle of St Albans game, first Battle of St Albans game, which is, if you in just a couple of paragraphs, is basically the first sort of big battle, or the first big engagement of the Wars of the Roses, which is where Richard, Duke of York, has his first sort of armed clash with supporters of Henry VII at the town of St Albans, and it's famous for being sort of a lot of fighting done in sort of medieval streets. So obviously you have to have at least a version of a medieval town, and so visually it's quite spectacular. But it's also not something that's you'd want to attempt on your own, or not together in 2 weeks. It takes a bit of time, a bit of planning. So we decided that would be a good, and a lot of our sort of collections kind of match that era of the wars, which is like 1450s. So that was the first thing we decided. Right, let's get together when this is all over. And one of the first things we'll do when we're allowed to mix is let's fight a big battle of St Albans. And from there we said, well, I think Stephen was stoking the fire, saying, why don't you start tweeting and Instagramming about that and post on social media about that and try and get other people involved in doing their own battles. So we came up with this idea, which is in simple form is called the World War of the Roses, which is basically to take part. All you've got to do is plan a game around the same dates that we're going to play, which is the 22nd and 23rd of May of this year, 2021. All you got to do is find us on Twitter, on Instagram, and tell us that you're going to play a game on one of those 2 dates. Tell us which battle you're going to recreate. And eventually we'll have a sort of network of games that are being played in different countries all around the world on that weekend. And we'll keep a rough score, basically, of who wins at each battle, whether it's York or Lancaster, which will give us an overall kind of like fun winner at the end of the weekend. And it's simple as that, really. And just post, if you're posting on social media, if you're planning towards a big game on that date, let us know by using the hashtag World War Roses, and get involved, basically. I think at the minute we've got a game in Canada, we've got 2 or 3 games in the UK, got a couple of games in Australia, got a game in New Zealand taking part, we've got one in Spain, people in America. So I think we're up to, got somebody in Scotland now, so I think we're up to about a dozen games of sort of recreating various battles, and there's probably about upwards of sort of 50-60 people all painting and using the hashtag, just painting Wars of Roses figures and using the hashtag for the
so that's gone quite wide then, hasn't it? It's from the 4 people initially, it's increased quite a number of times, hasn't it? 10, 15 times.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, it's gone from a shed to many sheds around the world. Not thousands, but we wanted, the principle of it was, let's get somebody playing the same thing as us. 1,000 miles away in a different country on the same weekend and having a laugh about it.
I think Stephen has got a bit of a history, hasn't he, of these social media led kind of projects. And I remember him in that first conversation we had that you build it and people will come and people are absolutely gagging for these kind of things, and certainly this project kind of bore that out, because what we found was lots of people jumped on it in a really quick time. Within a matter of weeks, we had people posting, we're definitely going to do this battle, posting painted figures on Twitter. It really picked up pace at a rapid rate of knots.
And just going back to the St Albans game, what sort of preparation has been done for that? I mean, my understanding is that it's on the edge of a town, and there's quite a lot of buildings involved. How are you going to recreate that?
Gareth. It's going to be played in Gareth's shed.
Yeah,
when restrictions are, so it's largely going to be on Gareth's table.
Right. So, Gareth, what are other people doing for your terrain then?
No, it's worth saying. I think we got a good example. We had Eric the Shed, didn't we? That had run this game and did it really well. So it was a good template, I think, that we could use, for our own game. He did, it was great. So I've got a couple of people at the moment who are working on the scenery for us. So I think to replicate the town isn't going to be too difficult. I know Chris has got some buildings as well that he's going to bring down. So I think we'll be able to just sort the town without no issue really. Size wise, we'll probably stretch it out to 5 foot by 10 foot. So you'll have lots of space on the side of the main battle area, to move troops in, reserves, etc. So it'll be good. It's just a shame that I think that the date may be delayed due to the COVID crisis.
Yeah, we should say that it's 22nd of February now, and we're expecting an announcement today. And obviously, we're waiting to the household mixing and crossing the borders is what we need to rely on, I suppose, when it's safe to do so.
I don't think you're going to be too far off with that May date. You might have to put it back a couple of months. And
I think we'll be lucky, but we'll see how we go.
I'm okay, see, because I've had my first job and I'm having my second job next week. So I'm safe.
Gareth's not worried, is he?
No, he's fine. He's fine. Just leave us poor peasants to die in the cold.
Going back to the terrain, though, I think it's like people will know if they've ever looked into it or googled it. It is quite a challenge, St Albans.
It is,
You've got to recreate not just a town, but you've got to recreate like a late 15th century town. And there aren't that many people doing ready-made late 15th century buildings out there. I mean, you get plenty of Dark Ages, like mid-medieval kind of thing. But for the kind of sort of civic buildings that you would have seen on the main street of St Albans in late 15th century, there's not an abundance of options out there. So thankfully, I've got a street's worth of stuff which is either I bought or made myself. Some of it I've handmade. A couple of buildings that have got the kind of the not quite Tudor era style timber frame, but they've got that late 15th century timber frame look, which I've had to hand make myself, which is an absolute pain. And I'm not going to do many more. And then the other thing that people like often get stuck on is, well, not stuck on, or is ditch, in that at that time the town was surrounded by a ditch that was known as the Tunman Ditch. And it's like how you represent that, because no one really knows what that really looked like. There are sort of sections in St Albans now of earth banking which they think are probably the remnants of the Tunman Ditch, which probably went back to Roman times, maybe. But you've got to try and find a way to recreate that. And it's literally a ditch barrier with, on the other side, there's probably a fence on the top of it. So you've got to try and circle what you've built with something to represent that. So
at what point did you think, why didn't we just do one of the battles that happened in a field?
Well, I think that was the main reason why we chose St Albans, wasn't it? Because
that's the point.
It was very distinctive. From that first picture, you would see, okay, that is definitely the first battle of St Albans. And it's as Chris said, it's the first battle, major battle in the War of the Roses. But that distinctive look is what we were trying to capture, really, because many of the other battles were just fought on open fields.
And what sort of number of figures are you looking at to get on the table for that game?
I mean, the sort of the aim, the goal, the dream is about 1,000 a side.
Okay.
Around that sort of bracket. I mean, I'll probably end up bringing about 600-700.
Yeah.
Which Gareth might fill in a little bit on my side, and Paul Baldwin will bring a few for Yorkists as well.
Yeah,
we'll be close to 1,000 assigned, I'd imagine.
Oh, that's going back to our definition of a big game, then we're well into that territory then.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think the interesting thing about it, right, is that if we had maybe another year, you could almost do it a 1-to-1 actually, because I think, if I'm right, I can't put it up and just looking at it, but I think the Royalist army was only about 2,000 on the day. That sort of region-ish. I think the Yorkists had a larger force.
Have you got a figure scale then that you work into? Are you working 10 to 1, 20, roughly? You've got a rough
Not really. It's probably about 2 to 1, isn't it, Gareth? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about this, and I guess we wanted it to be a game as well.
Yeah.
You know, the Yorkists could have rocked up with you know, twice as many figures, and it would just been a walkover for them really. But we wanted it to be a game, so we just decided really, Chris, wasn't it, on this kind of approximately 1,000 figures per side. So it's you know, it's more of a challenge for both sides.
And what have you decided on in terms of rules? Are you going to use a specific set or make something up, or how are you going to go down that rule? Dad?
Again, we've had long conversations about this. We wanted the game to move along at a reasonable pace, and we wanted to be able to finish it within a day. So we're going to use Hail Caesar. So I've not played these for a while. So certainly before we set the game up, we're going to have to all get kind of used to the rules and play a bit of solo. But yeah, from experience of using black powder and a little bit of Hail Caesar previously, I know that you can shift through a game in 6 to 8 hours, and that's probably about right, really, given the distance that people are going to have to travel to come to Abergavenny.
So the never
copy of it. I've played Hail Caesar. I have actually played it a few times in the past, and so I was familiar with it before lockdown, if you know what I mean. Be rusty as hell now.
So the never mind the bill hooks rule set that you spoke about earlier on, is that outside the scope of that rule set then?
I think so, because you can scale up bill hooks. I mean, it's designed for roughly 100 models a side, roughly. Yeah. Bill hooks is, and you can scale it up. And I've played with 200 models a side and just above that. But around that point is where you're really pushing it, because you can make your commanders a bit better and give them more actions. But you're really pushing the boundaries past that point. So it seems something like Hail Caesar is not complicated, and it's more geared towards larger games.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a Bill Hooks game on YouTube, and it did seem quite bloody. It seems to be very quick in terms of casualties. Or was it is
actually. Yeah. It's what I like about Bill Hooks is the maneuver phase is really quick and simple. So it's not. There's an initial phase in Bill Hooks, which is just the movement of troops towards each other, and you don't worry about. You're not worried about cards. You're not worried about who goes. It's just like you move a unit, I move a unit, you move a unit, which just brings both armies together really quickly.
Yep.
So there's not like an hour long worth of sort of meandering around.
Yeah.
So you get into, and then as soon as you get into combat, there's rarely engagements that result in like no casualties.
Yeah.
So it is relatively quick and relatively bloody, I suppose.
So what would the limiting factor be with that then to turn that into a big game? Is it the activation, or I'm just interested in how different sets of rules deal with the larger game?
It's all the kind of structure of it, I suppose, is all based around commanders that then have actions around a set number of units that have to stay within their orbit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And you can give them extra actions up to a point, but I think if you pushed it any further than I've pushed it already, you would get that system would fall apart a bit, I think.
Yeah.
With kind of siphoning people off into small.
I think a lot of rule sets do that. Have you had any experience with bill hooks, Gareth, or is it a new set?
No, I think we did consider them, Chris, wasn't it? But I think that single casualty removal thing was probably the big stop to transforming that into a larger game. I think that would have been quite challenging, given the size of figures that we're looking to get onto the table.
It's certainly with the way it was released through the magazine as a free set of rules. It certainly perked interest in Wars of the Roses. Is that something you found as well in with your World War of the Roses? Is it becoming the new Italian wars?
Yeah, I think the timing's come together quite nicely, isn't it, Gareth? I suppose. I think we were. I think the timing of bill hooks probably was released before we started talking about this. Just before we started talking about it, and then John's Kickstarter, Gareth, came in just before Christmas, didn't it?
Yeah, it was November time, wasn't it?
November, yeah. So the timing of everything's come together really nicely. So Wars of the Roses, having undergone, in my opinion, I would say this, in my opinion, like before the past 12 months, it had undergone a bit of a quiet period where there were no real new miniatures since the Perrys had brought out the plastics, and there were no sort of specific Wars of the Roses rule systems really kicking around that come new onto the market. And then you've got all of that's just happened. So somebody's brought out a successful set of rules specifically for the period, and somebody's done a whopping great Kickstarter that got funded in 3 weeks or whatever. To fund our new series. So it's quite nicely timed.
So you've spoke about these other people around the world who are involved. Are they putting on different games, or are they doing St. Albans as well?
They can do whatever they like. Basically, they can. They could make up a game really. Or
And do you know? Have you had any contact with them and know what they're doing?
Yes, the most interesting stuff about it is from people who aren't native English speakers in Spain, because my Spanish is decidedly secondary school Spanish. There's a team of guys there in sort of Barcelona, Catalonia way that I think they're doing Wakefield actually.
Just down the road.
Just down the road, yeah. So if you see a couple of like confused looking Catalonians walking around, point them my way,
Big yellow and red striped flags on the back, asking where the battlefield is.
Yeah.
It's under the co-op, lad. It's under the co-op.
Yeah, it's long gone. Yeah.
We certainly didn't want to be prescriptive at all, did we? We wanted people to have the freedom to choose what battle, what scale, how the size of the battle that they played. Really, it was, as long as it was War of the Roses themed, that was fine.
And you mentioned it in passing, the Vignette Competition. Tell us a bit about that. And I have to say, it's a rather spectacular prize. I think the big prize on Bullseye was smaller than what you people have managed to turn up. So,
I'll let Gareth explain the prize. Credit to Gareth's relationship with John, really, that we've got such a great prize.
So
I think, as I mentioned, John from Athenia Miniatures. It's a relatively new miniature company that John has launched really in the last 12 months or so. John was a supporter of this project really right from the start. So when I approached him and asked him whether he would put a prize up, he came back to me, yeah, no problem at all. I'll give you a full Kickstarter army, plus the add-ons, the Kickstarter add-ons, which was extremely generous, and again, I think it's sparked lots of interest.
So what sort of number of figures are you looking at then with that as an entirety?
Value-wise, it was about 200 quid's worth of figures. Number-wise, I think it's 120, something like that.
So over 100 figures.
Yeah.
So it's a good start then along the line to a big army.
It's a good bill hooks. Yeah.
And just for the listeners, then explain how people would need to get involved in this competition. Who's gonna do the judging? How's it gonna work?
Sure. So it's basically a vignette competition. So what we're asking people to do is to create a Wars of Roses vignette, and there'll be some people who don't really understand what that is, but a vignette is basically a single base with a collection of miniatures on it that are depicting some sort of scene. So people might think of a command stand as being a vignette, which is perfectly reasonable. You have a commander, and you might have a herald or a standard bearer or something like that, or you might have somebody shouting some message up to him or something like that as a command stand. So in its basic form, a vignette is like a command stand on a circular base. And the base size is we're looking for things that are on no bigger than a CD disc if it's circular, and a CD case if it's square. To count as a vignette, it would need to have at least 2 miniatures on it. So a single miniature is not going to cut it. You don't want to be too crowded, but there's no real limit, But a vignette is like a miniature diorama on a battlefield on a game. Thinking like that, and it's got to be a Wars of Roses vignette. Okay, so and what we mean by that is the miniatures have got to come largely from a Wars of Roses range. We're not going to be too fussed about the time period because that's kind of questionable, isn't it? Wars of Roses is arguably from like 1430 or something to 15 something, But as long as the miniatures come from a range, I mean, a bit of conversions are fine, mix and match is okay, but as long as the majority of the miniatures come from, they must have been painted by you, so there must be obvious things done by you, and not have it previously entered into any competition, which is just to prevent somebody rocking up and won something that's a vignette 2 years ago or something. And to enter, all you've got to do is post your vignette, create your vignette, take a good clear photo of it, and post it on either Twitter, Instagram, or the Lead Adventure forum, where there's a thread in the medieval section with the hashtag WWR vignette, hashtag WWR vignette. And the closing date is it's about 5 weeks from today. It's 8 o'clock, I believe, on March the 28th. That's 8 p.m. GMT, March 28th. You just got to do that basically, and we'll see it with a hashtag. If you don't use the hashtag on social media, on Instagram and Twitter, we won't see it. So make sure you use the hashtag. And then there's a forum on the Lead Adventure forum, Medieval Adventures vignette, Wars of Roses vignette painting competition thread. That counts as an entry. Stick it there. So there are 3 places basically where you can enter.
That's brilliant. And who's the judging panel?
Yeah, so this is difficult because I mean it will be. I'm sure it'll be me and Gareth. There'll be a panel. There will be a panel that'll do it. Judging is going to happen over the Easter weekend. There'll be only one winner, and judges will be myself, Gareth, probably Paul, and we're going to try and find a pro painter, to sit on as well. Somebody at least who's at least got close to winning something.
Didn't you have Kev Dellimore on your show?
Yeah, we did. I did have Kev Dellimore on my show, and I'm gonna put an invitation into him. I think he's a bit busy at the minute.
No worries.
But Kev would be great. Someone like Kev will step up and be there. If not Kev, it'll be somebody else.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic, guys. Good luck with the vignette competition and the game. Hopefully in May. I want to thank both of you very much for coming on. Taking time with me today on the first ever full proper episode of the Yarkshire Gamer podcast, and Gareth, your first ever podcast. So
I think my wife will be proud of me as well. I've behaved all the way through.
All the way. Well, you are no longer a podcast virgin, so well done, sir. So we'll just wrap up there. If people want to look at your stuff, Gareth, whereabouts are you visible on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on the Lead Adventure forum, and I'm also on Twitter. I did have a blog, but I don't know. I just don't have time these days to kind of keep the blog up and running. But yeah, Lord Ragland on Twitter, and on Laugh Again, Lord Ragland.
No worries. So just before you go, is there a question, any question that you would like to ask me as the host?
So what are you planning for your first big game when we come out of lockdown?
I am planning to do the Battle of Fornovo, which is the first big battle of the Italian Wars. I'm working on a publication at the moment for Italian Wars. and we need an excuse to get some photographs of figures and stuff. So that is going to be the big game. I've just put a video, the monthly update video has gone on today on the YouTubes, and I've just got some 28mm rivers from Last Valley. I don't know if you're aware of Last Valley. They are absolutely superb. Even if you just watch the video and flick to the bit where the rivers come on, have a look, because they are awesome. Absolutely brilliant.
They are good, aren't they, Last Valley?
Yeah. So that's me. Thanks very much, Gareth. Chris, whereabouts are you on social media? Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. YouTube's Winston Ab Reese. That's Winston AB Reese REES. And on Twitter and Instagram, it's Winston_AB_Reese.
That's brilliant. You've had an hour and a half opportunity to ask me questions in the Masters interview.
Yeah, I do have one for you.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. When are you going to build a massive Wars of Roses army, Ken?
Well, I have picked up some Wars of the Roses figures to do a little retinue for the hashtag World War of the Roses. Where we progress from there, I went to front rank because I've never had any front rank figures, and I love their sculpting style, and I've loved it for a long time, and never had an excuse to buy any. So this is my excuse. So I've bought like a small retinue, a unit of men at arms, unit of archers, unit of billmen, and that will be my little contribution. Whether I game with it or not, I don't know, but that will be my little contribution to the World
that'd be great.
Roses.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for that, guys. Thank you very much to everyone out there in podcast land or YouTube land, wherever you are. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another guest. We're going to be talking to Richard Harris. Richard is an old friend of mine from Yorkshire. Unfortunately, he's a Leeds United fan, so he's going to fail the quiz. But he runs a company called Legendary Wargames, who run Big Battle Wargame holidays. So it's going to be great to talk to him. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.